Today we have James Hawley Jr., graduate of our program from a few years ago, and a really great scholar. I'm sure you've seen some of his recent work, and he's going to talk about some of his ongoing work. He recently moved from Wayne State to the University of Michigan for 3 weeks now, I suppose. August 30th, which is an exciting move. And so as you listen today, make sure to ask some good questions, not only about the talk itself and the content, but also about the pathway and how to recognize these opportunities and how that transition might happen. So think of some good questions. I won't take any more of your time. James, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you all for being here.
All right, I'm gotta.
Let me just tighten up real quick.
All right, I was just looking on Zoom. Is this okay on Zoom? Okay. Sorry, y'all. Connected in. While we figure this out, I'm gonna go ahead and get going. So thank you for being here today. I wanted to share this song with you all because this was a song that was, let me get back in the screen. This song resonated with me and helped me get through 2020 when so much occurred, so much happened, right? A lot of folks were awakened and ignited through the death and murder of George Floyd, but so many Black people were killed by police that year and died through the pandemic. And so this song in particular was helpful in me thinking about when things like that occur, what is the effect? What is the takeaway, right? And literally he talks about, it's this line, somebody should give you a felony, right? Because you stole from me, my chance to be. And at that time, I wrote a guest editorial in JEE where I was trying to think, how do we connect what's going on in that space, what's happening in spaces like this, where it may be difficult because you have physical death in those spaces. And in this way, or in spaces like this, you have spiritual death, right? At the time, I didn't have that language, but Patricia Williams has this concept of spirit murder. And she talks about, in the beginning of her paper, going to a store, looking to buy a gift for her mother, and there was a buzzer at the door. Her face, can you move somebody? Somebody's hungry. She put her face up to the buzzer, pressed the button. She said a white boy, about 17 years old, blowing some bubble gum, and she buzzed, like, hey, like to come in and purchase. And he looked at her, and he said, we're closed, and popped this big bubble of gum. And she talks about how she was so enraged that she wanted to be violent, right? Like she wanted to go and like she felt like that was the only way she could articulate the way he made her feel is to exert some type of violence against him, even though she's an unviolent person. Later on, she talks about in that same piece, the ways in which the law, she talks about how in law, humanity of Black people is denied and how their death and harm applied to them is justified. And so Bettina Love describes spirit murdering as, I don't know what that thing is showing up. Okay. But the denial of inclusion, protection, safety, nurturance, and acceptance because of fixed yet fluid multiple structures of racism. So I highlighted a few words, just thinking about this idea of protection, safety, and nurturance. Bettina Love focused a lot on pre-college, high school, and middle school experiences of Black youth. And Patricia Williams talks about the purpose of her article is to examine racism as a crime. Again, connecting to how Leon Bridges talks about hoping for a life, wanting something better, and yet ending up having your life, your purpose, your opportunities stolen from you. And so today I want to help us think about how this plays out in engineering education program, in a particular program, which I'll allow you to figure out what their program is. But this is a work in progress. So if it's messy, if it's unclear, if I'm still stumbling over things, I'm still working on it. But one thing I wanted to highlight in my research, I do a lot of examination of my own story, centering my story and the story of others like me for the purpose of educating others. Not simply say, hey, look, this is what happened. This is what was wrong. This is what was right, but rather to highlight things that others may not see. Right. And so if we, I'm going to pass through this. If we think about engineering education, a lot of times folks are questioning why we don't have more Black professors or why Black professors aren't in certain spaces. And a lot of times the evaluation is, or the analysis about what could the Black professor do, or the Black undergraduate student, or the Black graduate student. And so those who are not there are often seen as the people who hold the key or responsibility to be getting into those spaces, when rather we don't look at the people who are there and what they are doing or not doing to make space for other folks who are not there. And so I wanted to look at this idea of uncritical whiteness. Not really idea, I guess that's just what I called it, but the ways in which white people contribute and participate in anti-Blackness that, again, we may not see. And so I'm going to share 3 vignettes, 3 stories, one being my own. The others, those who were harmed in the story, those who experienced negative effects, I asked them for their permission to share these stories. But those who did the offending, I did not. I prioritized the needs of those who were harmed. But also, again, the purpose is to share these things for the hope that through dialogue and through hearing them, we can examine how does anti-Blackness show up? How does racism show up in ways that may not appear intentional, ways that may not appear explicit, but have the same effect nonetheless of murdering the spirit, even while the body is still with us. So first, anyone heard of this book, seen this book before? I was going to say that. You should remember. So one of the first ways is the idea of Black scholarship being devalued. When I'm talking about a lot of these vignettes, I'll have epistemic X, Y, and Z. The reason why I chose the effect of epistemology is because generally in higher ed programs or doctoral programs, the expectation is that students are being trained to produce new knowledge, right? So in this way, we're not talking about simply a physical space of someone being somewhere and not having access, but rather the access to contribute in the way that they see is valuable. The ability to contribute freely and produce new knowledge. So first vignette, number 1. I'm a student. Back in 2014, I started the program. I'm trying to think through research problems. I know that I want to examine how racism is under acknowledged and the barriers and exclusion of Black people in engineering, particularly Black middle school children and Black boys at that. I can't remember how I came across this book, but after reading it, it's a thin read. But after reading it, I mean, I was just so enthralled, so invigorated. So I feel like it radically changed my perspective on how to approach the problems I was pursuing. One of the things, this book talks about a lot of different things, but one of the things in particular talks about how the transition from Black boys in 3rd grade to 4th grade is where a lot of the disengagement comes. So up to 3rd grade, they're very engaged in school. They love mathematics. They love to participate in class. They like going to school. But there's something that changes when they transition to the 4th grade, where they're not called on as much. They tend to lean more on their social capital as opposed to their academic capital and engagement. And what Dr. Kanjunfu argues is that there is a conspiracy, there is a network of factors, individuals, and systems within school systems that influence this reality. Now, why is this relevant for me? Because in engineering, a lot of times the reasons provided, the rationales for why Black boys or Black males are not there is lack of interest, lack of academic preparation, all these things. And so for me, this is showing that something else happens at a much earlier level that exposure won't address, right? That more preparation won't address, because we have these unnamed actors, teachers, and educators and systems that are pushing them out early on. Well, I took this book to my advisor. I was geeked, and I said, hey, would you check this out? Let me know what your thoughts were. I was anticipating a conversation about the ideas being expressed. Instead, there was this idea that, like, this is interesting, but it's not quite the scholarship that we respect or that we tend to rely on in engineering education. You can add this with something else, but standalone, this is not enough. I don't recall the exact words said, but that was the effect. That was my thought. And so this idea of this story to me represents the idea of scholars who are unaware because they only know what's in the traditional canon about the experiences of Black people, delegitimize scholarship outside of that. This book in particular is self-published, right? So it's not just the idea that the scholarship is unknown, but it's the fact that Dr. Kunjunfu and others like him have to create themselves avenues for them to produce the scholarship that they believe and we believe to be true and valuable. What resonated with me was not only the arguments being made, but being a Black male myself, connecting with the experience, right? So this is very detrimental to the idea of what it means to participate, whose knowledge is legitimate, and how we inform the problems that we seek to solve. Secondarily, this idea of epistemological standards of the academy. So things like who cite these people? Where is this person's credentials from? These are ways, citation practices, citation practices, but also journals. So as a tenure track professor, you are expected to publish in certain tiered journals. My first paper was in a journal called Journal of African American Males in Education. There's a plethora of information in that journal. It's open access. You usually don't have a DOI. So people publish heavily there, and there's a lot of scholarship of being Black in education, but that's not the one that people are encouraged to look at. In fact, one gentleman who went up for tenure at a different university, they looked at his article in Action, was it self-published in this particular journal, right? So they so demeaned this particular platform or venue that they thought that he created it himself to get a published paper, right? And so it's just a lack of regard for scholarship of Black folks. Okay, back. So another one, vignette number 2. Having gone through engineering education. So one thing, folks that don't know my story, when I was here, the entire 4 years I was here, I said I'd never be a professor, right? So I said, not only would I not like it or I'm not interested, I said, you'd never catch me doing what you all do. I want to go in the nonprofit space. I want to be more engaged. I want to be more practical, right? And here I am. So I get reached out to a lot of ways for a number of things. Some have to do with my scholarship, focusing on Black students. Some are like, hey, how did you end up not wanting to be in and now you're being there, whatever reason. A couple of years ago, a student reached out to me and they asked, like, hey, do you have some time to chat? I've seen your work. I'm just curious about your perspective about some things. I said, sure, let's connect. They're telling me about how excited they are to be in the program, different things they're going on. They say, hey, I just have a problem I was wanting to get your advice about. I'm like, sure, what is it? And so the student goes on to talk about how their advisor is giving them a lot of projects that are disrupting their ability to progress through the program. So they discussed about a plan, what was going to do, but they have so many other things going on that what they're doing for themselves is either put to the side or not seen as, or when they prioritize their own work, they're seen as not contributing to the work of the group. Here I highlight epistemic exploitation because in many ways, graduate students give extra labor and many times are expected to advance support the work of the professor, even though they came to do their own work, right? So in some ways, well, you have the expectation if you're working in a research assistantship or something like that. But oftentimes, the boundaries of how much work is expected to do in a certain way are blurred. What is different or extra about this particular situation is the student was being mistreated, and they felt as if they weren't being, their contributions weren't being recognized. And so they spoke with the faculty member about it, which is a major thing to do. There's so many different power dynamics as graduate students. You can get, there's not many mechanisms to hold faculty accountable when there is impropriety, but they chose to have what they thought was a respectable conversation. And in the midst of the conversation, the faculty member said, well, I need to put you in your place, right? I've had to talk with other students, let me put you in your place. And so what I think a lot of times is faculty forget or don't care the fact that we are adults, right? And particularly Black students have lived through many experiences that require much more than what it takes to get through a PhD, right? And so our adulthood, our humanity is undervalued in how our ability to show up and participate in this learning experience is actually recognized. Secondarily, in terms of white professors revealing their caucasity when Black students reject docility. So this same student is engaged in many different activities. When she showed up and enrolled in the program, obviously she was interested in being successful, but the sole thing that she does is not only participating in classes and doing research. She has, various other things that she does. Well, when I heard about the situation, my response, not even knowing her that well, I think if you care for people, it causes you to do certain things, even if you necessarily know that. I just knew, hey, this person's reaching out for help. This is what I'm thinking. I encourage her to leave the program. One, there are other opportunities and programs to, Purdue isn't the only place where you can get a PhD, but also there is a crop of Black scholars and other folks who I felt would be able to better mentor her. So I reached out to a friend of mine, said, hey, you got room for a student? They said, yes, they met. She's like, I appreciate it. Let me stick around. Let me try one more time. I said, hey, it's your life. I can't tell you what to do. I'm just trying to offer the help that I know, right? So she tries again, transitions to a different advisor. This time, going back to what I said earlier, her range of determining how she wants to exist in the program, and she has things that cause her to travel or be involved with other things. Well, there were expectations that were not clear between the advisor and her. So if things are not showing up or things are not playing out the way, in my mind, then you need to have a conversation to make sure that the expectations are clear, that the preparation is clear for the person to be able to do what you're expecting them to do. This student felt as if that was not the case. There was conflict. Conflict happens. That's not the problem. Anti-Blackness and epistemic exploitation to me means that the person's ability and agency to speak up for themselves and say their viewpoint is disregarded and their news and other things are elevated to someone else. So I don't have to deal with you. You're working. So when faculty act more as supervisors rather than advisors and treat students as employees, then they don't feel as if they have to respect their right to do things in a different way. Right. And then when conflict happens, how we handle that conflict, I think says a lot about our ability to value people. And so again, I'm listening. I didn't say I told you so. I'm listening as a careful person, but I told them, I think you should leave. And matter of fact, I know someone better this time who can particularly serve you or help you in a way that's particularly your needs. This student did leave and they're at somewhere else and thriving. But what I think what was different is not simply that the other person was Black, but rather they are willing to take what the student is doing and communicate and connect with that student personally. Okay, I can make suggestions to you, right? I can figure, hey, if you're spending time doing this thing or that thing, that will take away or detract from your ability to focus on X, Y, and Z. Or why don't you connect these things, right? How can what you're doing externally be relevant to what you're doing internally within this program? When you have a perspective where you value humanity, you see, how can this work? How can I assist you, as opposed to telling you what you should do or what you should not do. And story number 3, Black pain devalued. And this is idea, epistemic callousness. What I mean by this is the fact that white professors tend not to appreciate or think about how our existential reality as Black people in the program, in society, in this world, influences our ability to think and create knowledge. So in 2020, when there's a proliferation and a propagandization of Black people being killed, that causes a certain level of trauma and disruption to my ability to function intellectually. And it shouldn't just be me. It shouldn't just be the people who identify with the person that's being killed. Nevertheless, that can cause a disruption, and yet there's no space, no time for a student to process that, nor take space away without being penalized to seek wellness and healing. Because Black pain is devalued. On top of that, vignette number 3. There's a student, brilliant student, as all the other 2 that I spoke about, but this particular student already came into the program having come from another program, having difficulties in another space. This student had difficulties, many traumatic experiences, including loss of life and family members, loved ones, including suffering from organizational issues, logistical issues, where the student's employment situation was disrupted and not properly taken care of. And yet the student was still expected to participate and produce at a normal level. In engineering, so I teach in solid mechanics now. And in teaching solid mechanics, you have this thing where you're seeking to understand static equilibrium. And what that means is you're looking at forces amongst objects that are still and that not in motion. And you look at the different forces acting against it and things like that. But also what you do in a lot of engineering problems, you make assumptions, right? Those assumptions allow you to simplify a particular problem. In real life, you wouldn't be able to make those. You have to examine it for what it is. And so when I think about situations like this, I'm like, if we made 2 assumptions. Assumption number 1, Black people, we should believe Black people. Black students, Black people tell the truth, and we should believe them. Like, we should believe what if we assume that what Black folks told us to be true, until there's any evidence to suggest otherwise, but what they say is true, that would give us a radically different perspective. Secondarily, if we made the assumption that if a person who is in a PhD program is not producing or underperforming at the way that we expect, that is not due to any deficiency, but rather some other dynamic, then that will also help us to analyze situations differently. Well, what does that look like in action? For me, when the student told me things were not going well, things varied to me would normally appear to be unbelievable. People not paying them. People expecting them after we see various cases, people killing with impunity to show up for work and still produce, still write, still do data collection, still do X, Y, and Z. I believed her. When she told me that she was not writing and she was struggling to meet a certain milestone, I assumed that it wasn't due to her ability, but rather she just needed some assistance and perhaps direct help with getting there. So what do? We set up a writing group. I'm not on the students committee. I'm still learning the academy myself. But prioritizing that student's needs caused me to make time and I need to write. So it wasn't like solely about the student. I need to write as well. But I made time. We met 5 days a week for about 1.5 hours to 2 hours over the course of 3 weeks to help her get over that hurdle. So my point in bringing up these stories is not simply to say, oh, what people intended to do or didn't do, but when you reposition your paradigm and perspective about supporting students and valuing them, you tend to do things very differently, right? And the second point about white professors investing more in trying to say the right thing than do the right thing, I think we're in a space with engineering education where if anyone is like me, at least, I was trying to escape engineering when I came to engineering education. Right. I always thought it was interesting here at Purdue, at least, like the engineering education, most of the department is literally across the street from the rest of engineering. So I always used to say, like, well, we're not as bad as them across the street. Right. Always pointing externally about how much better we is and where we're at. And so the song that Leon Bridges, like, it resonates with me in this idea you're hoping for something much sweeter, and yet the very people you thought would help you rescue are treating you, or stabbing you in your back instead of explicitly in your front. Right. And so this idea where people are saying certain things, people are getting recognition for certain things, people are being seen as experts in certain things that has not been showing out in the learning process. And I would argue that a lot of these things have a lot more to do with the lack of Black faculty, Black students performing at a particular way, any particular way, than Black students themselves. And so here are some other things that, without vignettes, but we look at the other conditions that cause pain to Black students that are not dealt with. Number one, the comfortable absence of Black students. Purdue historically has never had a higher percentage of Black student enrollment than 3%. A public land grant institution in the Midwest. The reason why I bring up those high factors is there's a lot of Black people that live here, but also there are a lot of people that live across the nation. But more so, the idea of land grant institutions was to expand access. And so they may not say you don't value Black intelligence or Black skill sets or that Black students are deficient. But what the takeaway, what it implies is that Black students, there's not enough of you to be capable and qualified to be here to enroll more than 3%. The art of gaslighting. So how many of you have seen the We Support Black Engineers campaign at Purdue, right? This is not an indictment on anybody that participated in that, right? I know some faces, y'all was in the pictures and stuff like that. Rather, my point is they can say that we support Black engineers even while you only bringing in 3%. And even of that 3%, it's not as if everybody's having a great time, but that doesn't matter. There's no accountability for when what you say does not line up with what you are doing to us and with us. And yet you still get the benefit because when we graduate, it's seen as if a credit to you that we came through and made it out. Rather than recognizing all the little slights and cuts and assaults along the way that we had to navigate, the other supports that don't get any credit that we had to rely on to get through. Gaslighting. Because when I was at Purdue, I couldn't wait to get out. But maybe they're doing better now. It's been 3 years. Maybe some things have changed. No. Okay, I got some no's. Right? And so discussing future possibilities without repairing past harm. This is a very prominent thing right now. Following the year 2020 and all the trauma and murder that occurred, a lot of people are saying, well, we're going to do this. We want to do something. But that something rarely ever looks back or takes account or redress for the structures that created the problem to be already. But we're not even talking about structures, but how about how many folks have come through already harmed, left to heal on their own? It's always, not always, it's usually about looking forward, what we're going to do next. We're going to add this program. We're going to create this office. We're going to start to do, right? But this is 2021. So, I mean, we had a lot of years to see that promises have often fallen short. But in the moment, we're expected to believe that these people are going to do something different. These folks who have not done anything different than what they already been doing. And the cost of that is that those problematic structures and issues become further enshrined in the culture, remaining unaddressed and then becoming invisible, a part of the very institutional structure. And so lastly, the comfortable presence or absence of race-conscious Black faculty. So first, let me say, I'm not one of those, I'm rooting for everybody Black. No, humans are flawed, and I believe that you need someone who has a consciousness and awareness of how to prioritize Black needs and support Black students. But what research shows is Black faculty don't just support Black students, they support everybody. And yet, since I've been here, there was one Black faculty member who has not been replaced. Again, my point is not to argue or discuss why that is, but to state that I've seen institutions move mountains when they feel like it's a big enough problem. The absence of Black faculty is not simply about the presence or Black people increasing percentage, but rather it is about those are the folks who are most likely to do the type of work that I'm doing. So I can get mentorship, so I can expand on the scholarship, so I can get support in how I want to move through the academy. So it's not simply about having a Black person on your staff, but rather it is about that critical paradigm and perspective that can help you see what you cannot see unless you look like me. So one of the things I encourage in I'm trying to figure out, again, this is a work in progress. So I'm making these claims, I'm sharing, these vignettes, this data, and trying to figure out, again, how do we shift it back to whiteness, right? How do we examine the role in which that plays? And so these identities I thought was pretty helpful in thinking about how do white folks position themselves? It's not for me to determine how you situate yourselves or what you're doing. And so I'll read through, I'll start with white benefit, right? White supremacists, white privileges, things we kind of heard, but white benefit sounds a little bit different. Sympathetic to a set of issues, but only privately, won't speak, act in solidarity publicly because benefiting through whiteness in public. White critical. Take on board critiques of whiteness and invest in exposing and marking the white regime. Refuses to be complicit in the regime. Whiteness speaking back to whiteness. Oftentimes, when I came across this, I'm still wrestling with it, but I thought it was interesting because a lot of times you hear about white privilege, but a lot of folks situate themselves in white benefit, right? Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. I've been in so many faculty meetings where I have to say something to, which I'm just doing for my own dignity to defend myself. And then, there's silence or we close the meeting. And then afterwards I get an email or text or somebody meets me in the hallway. Oh, I support you. I need you to show up in that meeting. I need you to show up in the departmental meeting, in that seminar. This silent activism or support does nothing to change the conditions of my situation. But on the flip side, I thought the ultimate was white critical. I thought it was about folks just recognizing, refusing to be complicit and speaking back to whiteness. And rather what we see, at least on this scale, is about changing institutions, dismantling whiteness and not allowing whiteness to reassert itself. And I think, I agree. Well, I put a scale on this thinking this is the ultimate at the bottom, but I think white folks need to take some self-examination and imagine or think about, where do you find yourself on this? Are you simply a sympathizer to the pain and struggle of Black folks? Because if you don't address the ways in which you are participating in whiteness or benefiting, right? What I believe, I'm a reparationist. Let me just say that, particularly for Black Americans, right? So I believe it's not enough to create laws that appear equitable or equal. Because if you have a broken system, those equal things will only maintain what is already there. I believe in redistribution, not in the sense of niceness, but out of debt. We're talking about labor that was given and exploited. Much of folks who have wealth and capital in our society today, it was exploitation, which allowed them to get ahead. And so abolitionism is not about trying to be nice or equal. It's about examining justice. What does it mean to be just? What does it mean to be human and free? I think we have the perspective that these systems are not simply disadvantages and advantages. It's not simply about those who are marginalized and put on the side and those who have privilege, but rather there is intentional separation for those who are believed to deserve to get more and those who are believed to be less than human and devalued. And so close just a couple more minutes. First, this is the takeaway from me, or at least that I'm trying to articulate with this particular project, is the idea spirit murder, a result of anti-Black racism, is less visible than body murder, right? Someone being killed and not being with us, but it's just as pernicious or hurtful or harmful. Lastly,
you sound like you just side-eyed yourself. Cross-eyed and wealth of privilege you can't see. Can't hear the truth when it's coming from me because you ain't never had mouths you couldn't feed or places you couldn't be. Yeah, I can see you just stopped listening. Started thinking about the history and the songs they sang for your in-between that got trapped inside your American dream. Please tell me more about J&B. And then tell me what it's like to be me, because I was force-fed your perspective, told stories about your respect, and you want to tell me how I should define mine. Well, first, let's talk about how we're wasting our time, that burst of awkward, while we're standing in line to a movie about your mistakes, a movie about commonplace privilege wrapped in the silence of the unforgiving distance between your truth and mine. I'll say it one more time. You sound like you just side-eyed yourself, cross-eyed and wealth of privilege you couldn't see. Keep telling me what it's like to be me, and I'm going to show you. My shoulders are made of your insecurities. My feet are planted firmly on every single thing your ancestors tried to take from me. I am a Black queen. even when you don't know what that means. Even when your face got that kind of lean, like I showed you something that you hadn't seen, queen. When you walk away, I need you to act like you know what that means, because I don't know many queens that's gonna argue with your ignorance. They just gonna sprinkle some forgiveness and watch karma show you exactly who you was talking to. If I was you, I'd take about 2 steps off that steeple and start treating people like people, because respect was never optional. And queens fight just like boxers do. Your neglect is gonna be an obstacle, because we was the first mafia. Oh, that's a plot twist for you. You sound like you just side-eyed yourself. Cross-eyed and wealth of queendom you couldn't see. Keep telling me what it's like to be me, and we gonna show you my shoulders are made of your insecurities. My feet are planted firmly on every single thing your ancestors tried to take from me. I am a Black queen. Especially when you don't know what that means.
Thank you. I'll take any questions you have.